River.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I too want to express my deep gratitude for the tone in this room. This is a very powerful and very sad discussion to have. And to be here is a privilege for me to speak on Motion 174 that really talks about looking at suicide prevention. And we are talking about something that is often very hard for people to talk about. So I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the loved ones living with the realities of suicide, especially in the context of the speech that was just done before mine. The actuality of life when someone you love dies by suicide is simply unmanageable. I want to acknowledge that some communities in our country face much higher rates of suicide. Indigenous communities, the LGBTQ2 and military and veteran communities, just to name a few. In February of this year, a young man in my family was successful in his suicide attempt. It has been devastating for our community of just over 300 people, our family, and most of all, those who loved him the very most, his parents, his sister, his uncles, aunts, cousins, and his grandparents. Suicide shakes the very foundation of the people it impacts. The questioning of how and why are overwhelming. It is something that most people are unsure of how to address. I've heard of stories of loved ones of those who have died by suicide being completely isolated because people simply don't know how to go up and speak to that issue, to speak to that pain, and therefore too often avoid them. What do you say to someone who's lost someone they so love by their own hand? I have watched the struggle in my loved one's father. The words seem to be blocked at his lips. We know that words have power, and saying them aloud makes the reality that much more real. How do you carry this pain? How do you help? Who do you call? This is why we need a national suicide action plan to help all Canadians, a comprehensive plan that prevents and provides support when suicide happens and to stop further suicides. Madam Speaker, each month on average the Canadian Armed Forces loses one serving member to death by suicide. As a member who represents a base in my riding, I think it's important that the members of this House hear this. It is an epidemic that continues despite some positive steps taken to address mental health issues in the forces. When Bill C-77 was passed through this House late last year, I was disappointed by the fact that it did not remove Section 98C from the National Defence Act. This section makes self-harm a disciplinary offence under the Military Code of Conduct. That concerns me deeply, as a member of our military could be having serious consideration of suicide, but feel unable to disclose or ask for help because they could be disciplined. What a way to come forward and tell this horrific truth about yourself. When people are experiencing a state that leads them to thoughts of self-harm, there must be a safe way for them to come forward. My friend, the member from Esquimalt Saanich proposed an amendment to remove Section 98C from the National Defence Act in committee. Unfortunately, it was defeated, and the amendment was defeated because of so-called procedural grounds. This has been reintroduced in the House as Bill C-426. And Madam Speaker, based on the feeling in this House, I really hope that this bill receives unanimous consent for passing at all stages when it comes to this place. When we speak to this issue within the context of Motion 174, we see the need for it to be addressed. We do not want any Canadian in this country to feel that they cannot come forward to get the help that they so desperately need. The Canadian Armed Forces deserve to have our support. The mere existence of Section 98C continues to be a barrier for Canadian Forces members seeking the mental health assistance they desperately need. And this House has only one more opportunity to fix this. I would love it to be this Parliament. Today, as we are debating the Motion 174, tabled in this place by the member from Timmins, James Bay, I want to thank him for his tireless work and advocacy on this issue and his dedication to bringing it forward. I am relieved, Madam Speaker, to hear that the government will be supporting this. I also want to thank him because this motion speaks to the isolation that I mentioned earlier. When people are successful in their suicide, when people attempt and are unsuccessful, for everyone impacted, it is often the isolation that is the hardest part to carry. People are unsure of what to say, terrified to touch the pain of that choice, regardless of the result. This outlines exactly why it is so important to have a national suicide prevention action plan. This issue of suicide must be addressed directly and holistically. The more isolation and silence there is around suicide, the more people will hide their thoughts and not ask for the help that they need. And it is imperative that Canada not leave any community behind. We must have a framework because there are many small and isolated communities like the ones that I represent with limited access to service. How do you reach out in a safe way? And we all know that when small communities face successful suicides, it can often become an epidemic. Madam Speaker, the young man that I spoke of earlier that was my relative is the second in less than a year and a half in our small community of just under 300 people. The impact on that community has been profound, and the fear that another child is going to follow those steps has been something we all watch. And when I think about the Facebook posts that we've seen from some of our youth who are actively questioning the validity of being here in this place, it is so important that as a country, we remember that those children, that those people across our country are so important, and that we must address the isolation. And we can only do that by having a framework that goes across this country where we're working collaboratively, because nobody wants to live through this. And I think of my brother who has a serious mental health issue and how strong he has been in his life to face the multiple challenges, and how hard it can be when he's put in situations where people don't understand that invisible mental health issue that he lives with every single day. And it worries me when people don't understand that and can treat him in ways that are profoundly disrespectful. You know, I think all of us know what it is to love somebody and often feel like you're fighting for their very existence. And I'm really happy that we're here to talk about this, to have a system in place to address that. You know, Madam Speaker, recently we're doing a study in the Veterans Affairs Committee where we are looking at the impacts of veterans and the use of mefloquine, which is a medication used to prevent or treat malaria. Sadly, mefloquine has been identified as a medication that can poison the brain. There are many veterans across this country that do not know that they may actually have the impacts of mefloquine poisoning, and that their symptoms may in fact relate directly to that. Some veterans have died by suicide, and there are questions of, is this part of it? Is it due in part to the undiagnosed impacts of the use of mefloquine? This also must be addressed, and that's why this is so important. Madam Speaker, I also want to acknowledge that I have not touched on every vulnerable community across this country that faces a higher suicide rate. Those stories need to be heard, and I hope to see all members of this House support this motion so that this work can be done. I'm very glad to hear that so many here are, but I think we need to make sure that everyone is. Currently, Canada does have a federal framework of suicide prevention. This framework does not provide funding, goals, timelines, and activities that will reduce suicide, and does not assign responsibility to jurisdictions. And we know that if responsibility is not given, if jurisdiction is not given, if goals and resources are not given, the work simply does not get done. So, Madam Speaker, I just have to say how honored I am to be in this place when we're discussing one of the most difficult conversations. That in this House, we're all facing the challenges, but we're being brave to make noise where often there is silence. I encourage all of us and all of the people of Canada to remember to reach out to those people, even when it is hard and uncomfortable. Sometimes we just need to stand with people where they are uncomfortable. We have to admit that we are also uncomfortable, but know that we are with them, that we support them. And I think this bill will take those steps. And I'm really, really thankful that we're going to support it and that we're going to see change happen in this country. Thank you, Madam Speaker.